My name's Amanda Mayflower, and I was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas, although I've traveled around a lot. I've always been interested in theater and theater arts, although I went into education because it seemed like a surer bet for a paycheck. And so during the pandemic, I left my career in education. I'd been a teacher for 12 years, and I preferred working with the preschoolers because their imagination was alive. And so now I am working as the creative director for my own business, the Flint Fairies, and just making it work. So for me, creativity comes from connection. So I think that creative people are connected to the things that they work with. Creation is a generative process. It's a process of birth, and it's creating something from disparate parts to make something new again. In my own practice, I'm very place-based as an artist, and so my favorite thing to do is either to come in as a costume character, typically a fairy or an elf or something like that, and kind of recreate and bend the rules of a place, or I like to tailor my my exhibitions or the things I'm offering to the place that I am exhibiting. I'm what people in the university might describe as an animist, and what people in a spiritual sense might describe as pagan or heathen. So I derive a lot of my creative process from celebrating the earth. And so my particular bent right now is in portraying different fairy characters that are either elemental fairies or speak for different plants or trees. Right now, I'm working on a project with the Flint Hills Fairies that is native Kansas wildflower fairies, because I really want to open up a discussion about the earth here in Kansas. The older we get in our culture, the more we get indoctrinated into kind of a scientific Western mindset. And so for me, I really work to unravel that. And so that's really, my creative process comes in with that play, right? How do I speak for the trees? How do I speak for the earth? How do I be a fairy and talk to adults? I think play is something that as a teacher, I learned that there wasn't enough play in schools, and I had preschoolers who didn't want to come to school. And that was really heartbreaking to me. I'm like, you're in preschool, let's play! And they already had shut down. And to me, if we have half a chance of surviving as a species, then we're going to have to learn to play with the earth again and play with each other and reconnect. So that's why I'm just kind of throwing myself out into the world to create these spaces that allow a new perspective. And so for me, if, as an entertainer, I'm not really working in a theater, so I'm not working on a stage, right? I'm working in the public, and so I need to be able to touch and listen in the moment in order to get the most out of that experience. Personally, I find that my value system is at odds with the kind of overarching value system of the culture we live in, and so I really had to overcome my emotional desire to go to war. Right? The very first characters that I came up with, they're elven warriors, right? And they're going to go to battle for the trees. And while that was really personally satisfying, it's not the way to communicate what I'd like to communicate. If you're going into battle, you're going to get a fight. And so I had to work through a lot of emotions. Even that act going out into public is kind of like, people are going to look at you if you're dressed up. Right? And then are you in an emotional space to be ready to deal with that? Because there's going to be rejection to what you're doing when you're doing something that's out of the status quo. People are going to love your art, or they're going to hate your art, or they're going to be really confused by your art, and they may or may not be interested in engaging. That's kind of the personal aspect of my barriers. But culturally in the Midwest, we also don't tend to invest in people. I'm not sure, but I know as an artist, people struggle to invest in theatrical arts. They'll invest in the props, they'll invest in the costumes, they'll invest in the things that I sell. But investing and having me come to be a living, breathing decoration in your space is something that the Midwest hasn't really wrapped its head around. And so that's been a huge barrier for me. that was an interesting part of the market to realize, is that if I'm going to be doing something that's outside of the mainstream, I'm going to have to build the story around it and then also help people understand the value. It takes away from my creative craft. I mean, it's still creative, but I spend less time costuming and developing my character because I actually found that I have to create a booth and sell fairy wares. And I like doing that because then there's more fairies in the world. And sometimes I'm out in public and I see people wearing ears and I'm like, I know we sold those to them. And that feels really good. I want there to be more fairies and magical people. It's part of the mission of what I do. At the same time, I have to invest a lot into creating material items that people will purchase. So there's a lot that goes into the entertainment arts, being an actor or an actress or a singer. There's a lot of cultural barriers to that in the Midwest. I learned working in the school district that I'm a systems disruptor. And what that actually means is that I'm a reformer. And I believe in reform for the best for all, the good of all. And so it's more healthy for me to be in a freelance position because not everyone wants change and not everyone wants reform. So I've learned in my own practice how to give compassionate feedback, how to be less judgmental and give more grace, and how to really look for the positive things that are happening. Because everything, could always be better. But I think my personality is 100% into the work I do. I think it always has been, whether I was a teacher or a pretzel maker or a seamstress or a fairy. I tend to work backwards, I think. I see the end goal of what I want to create, and then I have to ask, how do we get there? So this whole process of leading a theater troupe is something that I'm discovering as it's happening, because I've never had the opportunity to work under anybody else. So, I mean, it's a little bit of research and a little bit of intuition and trial by fire. So I think being a creative person has opened a lot of doors. It's given me a lot of opportunities. And so I've traveled around the whole United States to see the best of the best. And so it's opened a lot of doors for me because I've seen what it's like in New York, and I've seen what it's like in New Orleans, and I know what it's like in Denver. But then it also, I think, has caused me a lot of pain. It brings me back to this place of having to be the person who is the systems reformer, who's creating spaces. And I struggle with that sometimes because I'm holding space for these other people to be fairies, but I'm spending so much time booking the shows, making the costumes, and doing all this back end stuff that I don't get to enjoy my craft. And so, it's a blessing and a curse, but I think overall it's allowed me to appreciate how big the world is. And I guess too, I'm very driven by connection, and so connecting with humans gives me a lot of joy. I think that's why I do immersive theatrical work instead of stage work, because being on a stage in front of people and getting applause doesn't excite me as much as directing a show for other people to act in so that I can see them grow and be successful. So I guess my motivation is that connection and growth would be what drives me as a creative. My advice would be to build connections. But really to try to look ahead and see who's a step ahead of you in their careers.
Totally fine.
It's what happens when you're creative and you're just I'll jam everything